welcome back to another one of these quick PlayBASIC live videos. Was looking around the forum before and ran into this very old example. Now, this is a game called Galactoids, I guess it was. It's written by Steve Spondon. It was written originally in DarkBASIC Classic, way back in 2002. Today's 2020, so around 18 years old. Now, the game's actually pretty good. It's a cool little game. DB Classic wasn't that great for doing 2D stuff. It was more of a 3D language. So the support for getting it to do anything in 2D was kind of a miracle, really. But what I noticed about this code that I ported across from the DB version to PlayBASIC is that I've written a little wrapper for it. So I've built sort of PV versions of what the DB commands are doing, the DarkBASIC commands are doing. There's not many of them because this program doesn't use a lot of the command set. But I just thought I would show it to you as a way, as one pathway that you could port that old code across. This is on the forum, by the way. It's over on the forum. The thread itself is called Galactoids 2002 PlayBASIC port, a free game. When was this posted? 2010? No, 2014. So I don't know. Okay. So here I'm saying the port was made in 2010. A lot of these things are probably sitting on my old, as I've talked about before, I've got these old collections of downloads, as you've probably got yourself, as everyone's probably got these days. Bits and pieces of old bits of code they've had for years and I've been around a long time, so things just clutter up in hard drives. And I found this one here and obviously made a port of it. Let's have a look at the game itself. I haven't really changed the logic of it. I've sort of just recreated the commands and the ones I couldn't directly translate I've made wrappers for that emulate how DB worked. So let's run it. It's kind of a Galaga type thing. Whoops. Our health is right at the bottom of the screen. I couldn't see it before. So when we're touching a bullet, we are dying. I like his artwork. It's pretty cool. It's very Falcons-like, if you've ever seen that game. There you go. As you can see, I suck at that game. That's all fine, but let's have a bit of a page through it. As I was saying before, I didn't change the logic. I've left it the way it was. So DarkBASIC doesn't have types in it natively. There's a few extensions that people wrote, preprocessors that implement something similar that let you do those things. But this is probably just written in straight DB Classic. So if you were to change them, you would make. I think that's probably the aliens things here. Probably SX is probably screen X1, screen Y1. A sprite, I don't know what they actually are, but you kind of make a prefix for it and put them all in the one space. This is you end up with the same sort of structure though. The program's laid out the same way, but the data is laid out in a pattern where all of the information about each particular character on the screen is held together. If you have parallel arrays, which is what we're doing here, this kind of approach here, then we've got an array with, in this case, 100 different slots. So we can have 100 aliens on screen at one time, and each array stores the x-coordinate of all of the possible 100. The other one stores the y-coordinate, and this stores whatever this is representing, and so on. I don't know what BS would be. You have to look through the code really to work out what these ones are actually doing. You could convert it to types, but you're not going to gain anything really from it. So if you're more comfortable writing code like this, that's fair enough. There are some benefits to doing stuff like that, which can be discussed elsewhere, I guess. But so we're loading in some sounds. I have no idea what this is doing here. Drawing something apparently. Well, have a look at what that does. Go to main. So filled circle. Okay, so I've probably emulated. Well, this might have been a function in the original code. The program sort of only has one function in it, and we've got very small labels as well. So it's kind of hard to read if you're not familiar with how the code's written, and I'm not. But if you want to put some time in, you better pick it out. But let's have a look at the labels. So we've got a bunch of labels. So obviously he liked to use the labels to look up to navigate the code, which is fair enough. It's got a new block there. There's a subroutines pretty much. So somewhere else there's a go sub to this particular piece here, and setting these properties, these global variables that he's probably using. We'll have a look. I don't know what this one particularly does, so we'll have a look. We'll just search for this thing in the code, see what we find. So new block is that function, or that power-ups. You might notice here is go to a new block, and new block was a subroutine. He's kind of using a common trick that, if you're familiar with BASIC, that people will do. Because this power up here is a subroutine, and we know it's called as a subroutine at some point by some other part of our code. Here, if I want to use any kind of subroutine, I can, rather than actually go sub to that subroutine from within this power up subroutine, I can go to it. Now, it just saves putting one extra breadcrumb on the stack. It's kind of a thing that pops up a lot in sort of classic basic optimization. There's these little tricks people use. These days, they're not very useful. Those kind of optimizations, anyway. That's our return statement if we fall through this logic here. So it turns out that new block is used right directly after our function here that's calling. We'll see if there's any other calls to it. No. So you probably could have just used that on one line, to be honest. Since nothing else is calling it, he could have just used those on there, but I'm not even sure what that code is doing, since these variables here are unknown to us. The code will behave differently. See here where we're using random? Because PB's random number function in particular will produce a different set of numbers given the same seed as the DarkBASIC random numbers, then the programs would act differently. So if you have like a rendering function that draws, say, a classic one is like these, like using sort of like generating height maps or you know, doing sort of generating textures or this kind of stuff, this kind of procedural generation thing, you would want to make sure that you probably use your own random table, and that table was transferred between different dialects if you're going to move code around between different languages, to make sure that the way that the sequence of random numbers that you're getting are consistent across all different ones. This wouldn't be. So this version would run different than the same code in DarkBASIC, for example, because the random function, it's going to produce a different sequence, because they're a different bit of code, they're seeded differently, etc. What else we got here? Let's have a look at the stars routine. So I'm assuming this draws the stars in the back of the game, or the classic sort of Space Invaders, or Galaxian was another one I was thinking of before, or Galaga. I think it's called Galaga in some pronounced, you know, in other places around the world. Us Australians, and we're so uncultured. It's just like Galaga. You know what I mean? We just have no concept of pronunciation of anything. And we don't care. Let's check it out. So, what's happening here? We've got a fixed number of stars. We've got 30 of these stars in the background. I think in the original coin ops, these are probably done with palette tricks. It would be hard to know. Like, some of these coin ops, you can actually have hardware scrolling of the background, for example, and foregrounds of sprites overlaid on these on top of these things. They're rarely bitmap based. In fact, I don't know any classic hardware that's bitmap based. There probably are some, of course. There's probably, you know, a lot of them really, but the ones I'm sort of thinking of would just be, they have a playfield and a bunch of hardware sprites, and probably some limitations on how many sprites can appear on certain lines. Anyway, so this bit of logic here that draws the stars in the background, I've cut out a few bits and pieces of it here to save us a bit of code. I'm not quite sure where we're drawing boxes. I don't know. So we've got stars F, which is the current star. We're going randomizing its position. If A is not lower than 20, then what are we doing? Our x coordinates are the same. We're adding something to the y coordinate. We're checking if we're within the screen bounds. And then, drawing it as a dot to the screen. If we're not above that, we're drawing this as probably like a particle effect for something else. Yeah, it's kind of interesting. If we just do a search for stars, well, we probably need something more useful than that. What about GoSub stars? I'm pretty sure there's probably only one occurrence of this. No, there's not. I think the way the code's structured is there's probably different loops of the game for, like, when we're in a menu, when we're playing the game, maybe game over screens, that kind of stuff. It's kind of a common way of laying these things out. Ship 1 label, okay. This is handling the docking of the ship, which is kind of like in Galaga, where you're trying to recapture your a fighter, so you can have multiple fighters. And there's I don't know if it's an official release or a hacked version, but there's a version of Galaga that I saw at the Melbourne show about, it was about 14 or 15, that let you collect as many ships as you possibly could, so you can actually have like 5 of these things or 10 of these things on either side of your ship. And it's where I got the idea from Spack Attack from. Yeah, long time ago now. It's a pretty compact program. We've got 700 lines, no comments of course, which will make it a bit hard for new people to go through this and decipher what's going on. Some pretty cryptic labelling, but overall it's a nice little game, and fantastic work to the guy who wrote it, Steve Spondon, very good. I remember at some point having this idea about making a layer, like a translation layer, which I've kind of done with Amos as well, and a few other little languages. But often I tend to write these things to the point where I need them to work, and then beyond that I don't care. So they don't get very far. If I need to port some piece of code, I want it to behave the same, I write a layer, and beyond that, if you need functions I don't use, then that's up to you to add those things. Anyway, if you need to port some old DarkBASIC Classic 2D code across to PlayBASIC, there's a bit of a library here that might be a start for you. Not saying it's gonna change your world, yeah, I mean, be fantastic, but it's going to give you something. You find a lot of differences between PB and DarkBASIC in general in the 2D realm. One that comes to mind is that PB has clipping of functions and DB didn't, which is very odd, you know. Even classic 90s languages, you know, from the, because DB is kind of a spiritual successor, I guess, in some ways. Was considered that to be from Amos. And it's more really, it's not meant to be a clone of Amos, but it has some similarities to it. But it really took the idea of making a 3D product into that. And they weren't the first, they were just the ones who managed to get to a point where people actually identify this is fun, you know. I mean, the crazy thing about that is a guy called Andrew Muller. He wrote a 3D BASIC for the Amiga back in 1988. Took most of that school year off to do it, and at the time, no one really understood what this could be. You know, it was probably a bridge too far for most people. It was like, wow. Because 3D was, you know, it was so difficult to wrap your head around if you're in a 2D mindset. And the computers you're using just don't have the horsepower to push, you know, enough polygons to make it fun for people. But he did it. More power to him. I mean, he solved problems that other people were struggling with, you know, today. Back in good old pure assembly. So I think in many ways he was actually the reason why I wanted to start writing my own phrases in the mid-90s. I got sick of I used Amos a bit, I used BASIC a bit, and was trying to make these macro languages with other people as well. And they work to a point, but at some point it's probably best to have your own preprocessor, phrase or translator, depends on what your back end is, and just do it yourself, you know. Anyway, got off track there a little bit. Just a reminder, this code's on the forum. You can find it on the forums. If if you by searching Galactoids 2002, the video will be on YouTube, etc. And have a bit of fun with it. You know, if you want to make a sequel, be my guest. Go for it. That's all for now. We'll see you next time. Bye.